getting the last mile may not always be economically viable.
Right.
You cannot spend millions of pesos to power 10 households. But the solution is there.
Show how corruption destroys value. We paid $1 billion for that project and got nothing for it.
Bakit tayo ang nagbabayad ng kuryente ng 4-piece? Joining us today are two of the most influential voices in the Philippine energy and financial landscape. First, a seasoned authority in energy infrastructure and a veteran of the power industry, and currently the head of the business development of Emerging Power Inc., Sir Joseph Nocos. And on my right, returning to the public eye just for this podcast, we're very privileged to have him here with us today, a leader who has shaped the nation's economic backbone as a former secretary of both the Department of Energy and the Department of Finance, former vice chairman for Credit Suisse Asia Pacific, and now the chairman of Nickel Asia Corporation, Sir Lito Camacho. Sirs, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us.
Thank you, Karl.
Yes,
thank you for
yung
having
topic
us.
natin today is very relevant to a lot of Filipinos today. So before we start, there is actually a subreddit called Explain It to Me Like I'm 5. So we'd like to ask you both now, how can you explain how power gets into our homes?
Okay, maybe I'll let Joseph do it because he knows the operations of a power company.
Right. So most of us, Carl, think that power comes from Meralco. So actually Meralco takes care of delivering the electrons to our households. So you have to ask, where is it coming from?
Right.
So the electricity in the form of electrons are produced by power plants that are all over the place. So different kinds of power plants, coal, gas, diesel, then you have the renewables, solar, wind, hydro. All the electrons from these power plants have to be transported to Meralco via the transmission lines of NGCP.
Okay.
So that's a transmission sector. So from the generation to the transmission sector, the electrons then have to go down to the distribution level at a lower voltage. The Meralcos of this world's VECO or Davao Light, they take care of distributing the power to the household. So what you get at 220 volts at home originally came from the power plants at a very high voltage. That's then transmitted across the NGCP lines, down to the Meralco lines, and onto your household.
All right.
Okay, expressed differently, no? Because I was partly involved in the legislation of IPIRA, which is the one that has restructured our whole power industry. I think of it really in 4 boxes. No? You've got power generation, as explained by Joseph. Then you have transmission, takes it around the country. And then you have distribution that takes it to the homes. No? And then we think of Meralco because Meralco is the biggest distributor, but it also happens with all the electric cooperatives in the provinces, in the towns. And you have large distributors also, like in Davao, in Iloilo, in Cebu, etc. And then in the IPIRA, we also created a 4th segment, which is retail.
Okay.
Which is, anybody can do that any utility company can do retail. Now, so you can sell by buying power from the GenCos and then paying the transmission fee to the NGCP, and then you pay the distribution fee to Meralco or the electric cooperatives.
A lot of Filipino consumers right now are actually complaining of the high prices, no? And of course, we have the ongoing war and the summertime, no?
Yes.
But let's move beyond the high prices complaint and look at the structural machinery first. So, Sir Lito, you've been a cabinet member and also the main proponent of the IPIRA law. But decades later, the Philippines still has one of the highest power rates in Southeast Asia. So do you think this is a failure of the law's design or a failure of the competitive model that it was supposed to create, or maybe neither?
Okay. Well, first, let's put it in the proper context. When we worked on the IPIRA, the Philippines was considered the second highest cost in Asia, next only to Taiwan. Today we've improved a little bit because Singapore and Japan are more expensive than us today. So we've made some improvement. Unfortunately, it has not resulted in really cheaper power than that our public would have expected. I don't think it's the structure. I don't think it's the legislation. I think it's a number of factors. Now, when you think of our power cost today, I think what keeps it elevated, number one, we continue to import a large portion of our fuel source. I think when you think of coal, when you think of oil, and when you think of natural gas, still comprises about 2/3 of our fuel source. Back in 2001, when we were talking about Ipira, it was probably about 44-45%. So that increase exposes us to the volatility of these commodities in the world market, and then the peso dollar rate, et cetera. No? The second reason, I think, which differentiates us from some of the Asian economies is we have a very low or no subsidy on the cost of power. We decided that as an economic strategy, that involved privatization and so on and so forth. Now, we deregulated telecoms,
Right.
Many other utilities, including power. So the Philippines is one of the places in Asia that does not subsidize power. Some of our competing economies around our region, they do subsidize power. So that's another reason. The third reason, I think, is unfortunately unintended consequence of Ipira is that our transmission capacity has not grown as fast as our generating capacity.
Right.
And that, I think, puts pressure on the cost of transmission. If you look at in terms of total capacities, from 2001, when Ipira was set up, to today, 2025, the generating capacity has probably increased by about 160%, almost double. On the other hand, the transmission capacity, which, by the way, in 2001, when Napocor owned both, was in equilibrium, was about 13.4 gigawatts of capacity, both for transmission and power generation. Transmission only grew by about 80% during that same period, when generating capacity grew by 160%, so almost double. Right? And that puts pressure on the transmission, the cost of transmission, not only in the actual cost, but even the delay, the timetable, because unfortunately, NGCP has not been able to go at the same pace as the growth in generation. And I think even in API, we have those challenges. So I think to put it into context, number one, we're no longer necessarily the most expensive, but we have not been able to take advantage of what Ipira was really designed for, which was to create competition, and through competition be able to get the lowest cost possible. Ipira was also created not only for cost, not only to bring down the cost, but to make sure that we have power. Because remember, you're not old enough, perhaps you were not even born, but in 1990, 1991, 1992, we were suffering daily brownouts because we didn't have enough capacity. And I remember when I was helping promote Ipira to the public, the tagline that I thought was most effective is that no power is the most expensive power. Because that required individual residences to buy a generator and use the dirtiest polluting fuel source, which is diesel, because of all the brownouts we were experiencing. And that's your most expensive power. So the other thing that Ipira did was really to make sure that we can sustain the capacity that we need both for generation and ideally for transmission as well. That didn't happen. But we were able to build capacity that the government, if Napocor had continued to be a monopoly, would have been in no position. And as Secretary of Finance, I can tell you, we had no fiscal room to be able to support the power sector.
Sir, before we get to Sir Joseph's perspective as a developer, I'd like to go back to what you said, sir, yung third reason why power can be expensive, the transmission capacity has not grown. Why is that, sir?
Well, I think here, when we were modeling how the power sector should look like, now the four segments that I talked about, we know that power generation we wanted to liberalize, we want to open to competition. Transmission, by its very nature, has to be a monopoly.
Correct.
Okay, and distribution, to a large extent, also is a monopoly. The way you can do that, the way you can do that and still be able to provide the most optimal power, cost of power, is by regulation. And that's why we created also the Energy Regulatory Commission, the ERC, and strengthened them and gave them all the authorities to make sure that they can regulate those two monopolies that are mandatory in the system, no? Transmission and I think it's a combination, no?
And if I can add just very quickly, as the Chairman Lito said, we're in the top three or top four: Taiwan, Japan, Singapore, and then Philippines in terms of power rates. You have to look at the common denominators among these four countries.
And what is that, sir?
Lack of indigenous energy sources is one, right? Second is no subsidies.
No subsidies is very
across all these four countries. And then the geography is also another thing. The Philippines is an archipelago.
Right.
So you don't have the benefit of sharing energy sources across the islands. The way that, for example, the other Southeast Asian countries which are contiguously located next to each other.
Right.
Thailand gets power from Laos, cheap hydropower from Laos. We don't have that benefit.
Right.
So it's not a failure of regulation or legislation or even business.
It's a combination.
It's a combination of
factors,
all of these factors that we're unfortunately saddled with.
Just to answer, no, from your perspective as a developer, the system is often described as a gauntlet of red tape. So, what are the invisible costs in our current regulatory setup that end up on the consumer's monthly bill? And is there a way for us to even lower the current rate?
Well, I'd have to speak from my personal experience. And I remember being in a forum where somebody asked this question about our experience in getting permits. That's red tape, right?
Yes.
And I said, from my experience, it was not a problem for me. My ECC, the land use conversion were not an issue because we complied with the rules. There are some timing issues as far as the processing, like because it involves review committees that you need to manage and organize. But other than that, there wasn't any inordinate amount of delay that was either intentional or just out of sheer inefficiency. So, but that said, it is a problem. Getting the major permits like your ECC, land use conversion, approved. Not part of red tape, but also has something to do with power cost, is getting your NGCP approvals done. Okay? And all of these things, when they combine, how do they end up in your power cost?
Yes.
The cost of delay. When your project is delayed, your interest during construction piles up. Okay, and it adds to the cost of the project. And somehow part of it ends up in your bill. So how do we get out of that cycle? It's really for us as developers like EPI, it will be our responsibility to make sure that we do things on time, that our submissions are complete, that we manage the process well, we deal with our stakeholders properly, and it's really just compliance and proper coordination.
We see from both of your answers now that it's the system. But I also want to ask, since we often hear about the oligopoly in the power sector and the concentration of power among a few players, do you think that's a natural result of the high capital requirement? Or is it a barrier to the open competition?
First, the premise of your question, Karl, I think is a little misplaced, if I may say so, because there's certainly a lot more competition now than when we started.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, if you go back 20 years ago in 2005, there were probably less than 10 players in power generation. Today, there's probably closer to 35.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more competition.
Yeah.
I think you see a lot of not only the large conglomerates, but mid-sized and even small companies that are now into power generation, especially when new technologies like solar, wind, then that created, I think, a lot of opportunities for other companies, even smaller than the big conglomerates, to do that. There have been a lot more foreign parties coming in to co-invest, to partner with local groups. So there's a lot more competition now than there were when we started.
Yeah.
Remember, we started with no competition because Napocor was a monopoly in 2001. By 2005, there's probably less than 10, maybe 8 or so players. Today, there are about 35 players. So it's a different ballgame together. So the premise of the question, I think, is not correct.
Okay.
Yeah, totally agree with the chairman.
Before,
Well, si Sir Lito gave us a bigger picture, no? Tama. So, compared to back then when there was a monopoly, now we have
it's
more
it's a free market, and we have one of the few functioning wholesale electricity spot markets in the world.
Yeah.
Right, which really creates that marketplace where people can buy and sell power.
Coming from our side in operations, one of the hardest parts of our work in EPI is to sell, to acquire PSAs. That just shows you how competitive the market is. You come in with 450, somebody comes in with 430, down to 4 pesos. That's because there are many players. And then also, that's on the sell side. On the buy side, now people have the power of choice.
Yes.
Right? So you have the contestable market. When we started, everyone was captive.
Captured. It's captured market.
Yeah, captured market, captured by Meralco, for example. But now, if your demand is more than 100 kilowatts, you can choose from whomever you want to buy power. Now, your house, you don't consume 100 kilowatts, but your village, if you put everyone together and aggregate into 100 kilowatts, then you can, as a village, demand to buy power from, not from Meralco, but somebody else, from a retail electricity supplier, which Chairman Lito mentioned earlier is the fourth sector in the power industry.
Before we leave the issue of cost of power, as just a small footnote, and it's a small relief, but Joseph, correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of what's happening now, when we created EPIRA, one of the challenges that we had was we had a lot of stranded cost in Napocor. When I say stranded cost, Napocor accumulated so much debt with no equity. Puro utang. No? If I remember correctly, back in 2001, I think Napocor had about $5 billion worth of debt, all guaranteed by the Republic. Now, we did not want to charge that in one go, either to the government or to the consumers, because that will, create really a very disastrous situation. What we did in the EPIRA is we reshaped the charging of that stranded cost, and that was, if you look at your Meralco bill or any other bill, if you're in the provinces, there is what you call universal charge.
Right.
Right? That's supposed to expire in 25 years. We would have paid all the stranded costs from 2001 in 25 years. This is 2026. So I am hoping that by 2027, that line of universal charge will disappear from your electric bills.
That's something that not a lot of consumers know, sir. That's supposed to be.
And that's not properly appreciated. Because what the chairman did and what the framers of EPIRA did was to rationalize the payment of that loan, of that debt. So what happened was, okay, you have this much debt, right? One option is to pass it on to the taxpayers. But then, if you're a taxpayer and you're consuming less electricity than NAC Power, you're paying an unfair, disproportionate amount of the loan. But if you charge it according to consumption, then you equate.
And then what the other thing we did was we spread it out over 25 years so that it was not as painful.
Correct.
But nevertheless, it's still there. You've been paying for that for 25 years. It expires this year.
Correct.
Before we finally leave the issue of cost, we already had a good foundation with EPIRA. Ideally, sir, do you think EPIRA did what it
was supposed to do?
What it was supposed to do?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But are there other things that for you parang could have been improved in the way it was implemented?
To me, it's implementation, it's execution, right? I mean, I think Joseph talked about the execution on expanding the transmission capacity, right? And that, to me, that's a big challenge. But EPIRA has done exactly what it was designed to do. The government at that time was no longer in a position to continue supporting and providing funding to expand our capacity in generation, to expand our capacity in transmission. So we really had to go and privatize those portions. We had no choice, right? And by the way, incidentally, that has also created the FDI, or foreign direct investments, that we've been enjoying for the last 20 years. Without EPIRA, I mean, I mentioned earlier, we expanded our capacity by 160%, right? almost triple, right? The original capacity. Just think of the dollars that came in because we now had the capital to support building that kind of capacity. The government would never have been in a position to do that.
Correct. I was about to say that you talk about competition, right? The IPIRA created exactly the field of competition.
Right.
There are far more investors in the foreign investors in the power sector in the Philippines than in any other country in the region. You know, all the foreign investors would rather go to the Philippines than Indonesia or Thailand. Which
Because our legal framework was very clear.
Yeah.
Right?
Predictable,
That's what IPIRA
clear.
Now let's go to access. No, in the Philippines, we have 5 to 10% of the country that still lacks power, and based on what we saw, we're at least only Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar are behind us. Why is the total electrification of the country very hard? Why is the last mile so difficult?
Well, the first thing is geography.
Yeah.
Right? As I think Joseph explained it, we're an archipelago, right? We have 7,000 islands,
Right.
most of them inhabited, right? I mean, there's scale, and then there's connectivity, right? It's transmission and economic scale. I mean, you know, do you connect an island and spend whatever you need to spend on transmission to give power to 10,000 people living in the island, right? But in the IPIRA, we actually provided for that. We created SPUG. You know, I can't remember what SPUG and the
Small power utilities group.
Okay, that was supposed to provide subsidized power to small communities in isolated areas. Thankfully, technology has changed. Solar in 2001, when we were talking about IPIRA, was not in the picture, right? It was very expensive. You would have had to subsidize them, etc., etc. Today, and that's why NAC has gone into solar power through EPI. It's because the economics of solar has changed dramatically. It has now become competitive, right? And solar provides us the ability to provide small-scale power generation in small communities. And when you tie that up with batteries, then even better, because now you can provide them full whole day power, right? So to me, it's a matter of time because solar is a new thing. So I think it's a matter of time when more and more of the small communities will be able to get their power as they really rightfully deserve, because we now have the technology to be able to provide that. But we just need to be patient, and we need, players like NAC and EPI to help and support the move to be able to electrify our small communities.
And I'm happy to report that that's one of the EPI chairman's and NAC president's priorities, how to bring power, a cheap, affordable power to the small islands. But to give you, just to add to what Chairman Lito said, connecting the last mile may not always be economically viable.
Right.
You cannot spend millions of pesos to power 10 households. But the solution is there. You put solar and battery in that barangay.
Yeah.
You put a microgrid, then you got it powered.
So the trend now for these last mile places, is we use decentralized microgrids.
Microgrids, yes. Sometimes can really be very, very small. I mean, you can have a little barangay and just have enough solar power just to allow them to have light and charging their iPhone, their
many
cellular
solutions
phones.
now. So I don't believe that the last mile electrification will be much of a problem moving forward.
Right.
And also take the chance to update our chairman that in EPI we're working on solutions to help lower the cost of power in the small islands.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
Right now, all the small islands in the Philippines not connected to the grid are powered by diesel. With where diesel prices are today, the marginal cost of producing power every kilowatt hour is roughly around 20 pesos per kilowatt hour.
Who can afford that?
20 pesos per kilowatt. And then, so because of the provision in the IPIRA that protects the marginal consumers, in the small islands, the people pay only what is called the socially acceptable generation rate, which is around 7.5 to 8 pesos per kilowatt hour. So 20 minus 7.5, the 12.5 is paid for by the subsidy, which comes from the rest of us.
So it's government funding coming from taxpayers' money.
Right. So the solution that we're developing in EPI is to put together solar and battery power stations in the small islands that can produce power 24 hours a day at only around 8 or 9 pesos per kilowatt hour. Thereby almost erasing the need for subsidy. And this is brought about by, number one, technology, right? Second, scale. The rapid growth of solar and battery demand all over the world has brought the cost of these technologies down to an affordable level that will be viable for investors like us to now promote as solutions to what was previously a very expensive problem.
Right. And Joseph, I just want to add something very important. It's not only cheaper power, availability of power, it's clean power.
Yes.
Right? Because diesel is probably the most polluting source of power. No? And by replacing diesel with solar, you are not only helping the consumers, but we're also helping Mother Earth to clean itself.
Yes.
Sir, let's now go to the renewable transition. No? The government wants 30% of renewable energy by 2030 and then 50% by 2040. And as someone building these projects, what are the biggest misconceptions about how easy it is to switch from coal to more to cleaner forms of energy in the Philippine context?
If you asked me that question 10, 15 years ago, I would say it's an absolute misconception. And that really has to do with the cost.
Right.
When I was promoting a coal-fired power plant in 2010, I would always be asked, why not solar? And I would say, if you do solar, it will cost you 8 pesos per kilowatt hour. Whereas coal will only cost you 4 pesos, 3 pesos, 4 pesos per kilowatt hour. So, no argument, right? However, now you can produce power, like I mentioned earlier, solar and battery, right, at 7 to 8 pesos per kilowatt hour. Competitive already to coal, gas, and definitely cheaper than oil. So the transition is possible.
So you think the government targets are reached?
I don't know what the target. I think 50% is the target. That may be a little ambitious.
It's ambitious, yeah.
First, let's also recognize the percentage of power being generated by solar, wind, biomass is significantly higher now. It was probably 2% or whatever in 2001 when I was looking at this as Secretary of Energy. Today, I believe it's about 25%.
Right.
Now that's of capacity, but because remember, solar is not a whole day capacity, right? It's maybe a third of the day capacity, right? So you have to be. It's not apples. It's not apples to apples, right? So that's one thing. I also would say that we cannot totally eliminate the need for other sources of power.
Yes.
We can't go on a strategy where everything is going to be renewable. That could be disastrous and lead to shortages and so on and so forth, because there are also limitations and there are challenges. So I think it should continue to be a balanced approach. Correct. We may have to continue using coal, unfortunately. I mean, I'd rather not, but it's a necessity. It's a base load. It's a cheap base load. We need to continue developing hydro and geothermal in the Philippines, so it's domestic based. We don't have to spend dollars for that. It's not an imported. Natural gas, though it's still imported, but it's a little cleaner than coal. So I think we need to encourage that. So I think diversification is important. So I think the proportion that is provided by solar, wind may not grow very much, much more than where they are today, but it will have to grow because demand is growing, capacity is growing, right? So we will continue to grow our solar capacity, our wind capacity, but we will also need to grow all the other other alternatives.
I almost addressed the chairman as Secretary of Energy. He's channeling his past as Secretary of Energy, but it's very true because in what we call prudent utility practice, it's good to have a diversification of energy sources. So we cannot be all renewable. It has to be a good balance of renewable and non-renewable power sources.
Let me just add, I mentioned about the not over relying on, for example, solar. Because I don't want us to underestimate the challenges of being able to successfully develop solar power. right? I mean, Joseph, we know that, right? In EPI, there are land rights, there are rights of way.
Correct.
There's a lot of challenges in being able to develop solar. Land is probably the most important thing. The most available land is so far from the transmission line, so it becomes expensive, right? The most suitable land is in very expensive areas. I mean, there's a lot of things that you need to be able to balance.
So rationalizing all of these concerns is, a key function of the Department of Energy, actually. But for us on the investment side, as a generation company, the choice as to in the achievement of a balance between renewable and non-renewable, it really has to do with being able to present to our prospective customers a good mix.
Right.
Because if you propose all renewable, subject to the changes and the volatility of the weather and the climate, right? Then they will see you as less reliable than one that has a backstop in the form of non-renewable energy.
Like hydro, renewable still, but hydro, geothermal, etc.
So if you go into non-renewable technology, then of course the choice is what type of technology. And that's where you get into now, I guess, a judgment as to whether you should go more coal or more oil or more gas. In our case, we believe that gas is the way to go because it's clean power and also relatively cheaper than oil and more acceptable than coal.
But given the current scenario, sir, do you think the government should lift the temporary ban on coal?
Well, if I may answer that, Mr. Secretary,
Please.
Mr. Chairman, even if the government were to lift that moratorium, finding somebody to build the power plant for you, the coal-fired power plant for you, finding the supplier of the boiler and the steam turbine generators, the banks to finance it, the insurance companies to insure your project, will be more difficult than getting the government to lift the moratorium.
Yes, I agree with that. Having been a former banker, I've retired as a banker now, but financing for coal-powered plants and coal mines is almost non-existent. When you talk about the global international banks, there won't be any financing available, so it has to be self-financed. So that will create its own challenges. The government does not even have to impose. There will be constraints enough to prevent an explosion of coal power plants.
Well, since you're already talking about investments, sir, and as a former banker and DOF secretary, of course, decarbonization requires massive capital. So how do we attract foreign green investments when our transmission grid, or the NGCP, is often cited as a bottleneck?
Well, first, let's just make sure we all understand. I don't think there's any scarcity of financing. There's equity capital available for power projects. I think Joseph alluded to that earlier. There's more capital than projects available. If there are not more money coming in, it's because there are limited projects that are being done. Okay, so it's not a lack of capital for both green as well as conventional power generation. So that's not the issue. Transmission, we've talked about that already. There's partly, I think the regulators and the provider NGCP have to work better together so that they can build more capacity to support the generation. Because it's a mismatch.
Yeah, also, just to update the chairman, there's a new policy now, Mr. Chairman, that allows third parties other than NGCP to invest in transmission assets.
How do they do that, Joseph? I'm not aware. Within the EPIRA. Within the law.
Within the EPIRA, yeah. So you, for example, we want to build a power plant. We want to convert our coal plant in Palawan from producing steam to electricity.
Yes.
And to supply power all the way to Puerto Princesa. The issue there is the lack of a transmission capacity. If it makes economic sense, we can invest in the line.
Okay, we pay for the line.
Pay for the line, invest in it, and then charge for it.
From NGCP?
No, so we charge our end customer, which is Paleco, and Paleco charges the end user, and then eventually get that recovered if government or NGCP takes over the line.
Okay.
So it's intended
But
to...
it has to be with consent of NGCP because they do have the franchise.
You need to coordinate.
They have the national franchise.
You need to coordinate and get NGCP's consent.
Right,
and we met with the NGCP president yesterday.
Oh, that's good.
He confirmed that this is something that we can actually engage in.
Well, I think that's good that they recognize that they have their own challenges,
Yes.
no? Their own, and by allowing third parties to be able to do it for them, we're helping the whole country light up.
Right. So, for example, if you're a foreign investor and you talk to BCDA and BCDA tells you, okay, here's 3,000 hectares in the new Clark City area. 3,000 hectares is that's 3,000 megawatts, enough for you to invest in the line that will connect your project to the grid, to NGCP. So there's enough scale already to support that kind of investment.
You also mentioned LNG a while ago.
Yes.
Do you think this is just a bridge fuel, or you think it's the way to go?
Well, to the chairman's point earlier, we need to have a balance between renewable and non-renewable. So I don't think it's a bridge. I think it's going to be a main feature in our energy mix to replace coal.
I agree with that. I mean, you can't help it. You can't really rely on just one or the other. It has to be a diversified platform of different sources. And LNG is an important part of that.
And I think that begs the question, okay, so if we cannot do without the conventional technology and rely solely on renewable, what would our option be, right? And I'm a firm believer in that nuclear power is the cleanest form of energy, and depending on where you sit on the nuclear debate,
we may have a difference in opinion there.
I'm actually glad you said that.
Next
sir.
podcast with Chairman Dennis.
But that's actually part of our questions, no? If we should do nuclear or not.
Okay, I will let my senior and the Secretary of Energy.
This is a personal view on nuclear, and I say that being a native of Bataan, where the first nuclear plant would have been located, I was already very concerned even then. And even then, we were already in a better position because we had, knowing that we were going to develop nuclear plant in the Philippines, we trained skilled people, engineers, nuclear engineers, to be able to run our first nuclear plant. That was in 1979 or 1980. It would have been commissioned, I think, in 1983 or 85, thereabouts. No, obviously that didn't happen for reasons I can, we'll spend another hour if I were to tell you the reasons for that. No, but those people have long retired or have died.
Yes.
So we don't have the body of skilled Filipinos who can run a nuclear plant. Okay, that's number one. Number two, location. Okay, we're part of this, what they call this, the ring of fire.
Yeah.
We have earth, we know, I mean, Mayon volcano is exploding, Taal is exploding, that creates earthquakes, and so we know what happened in Fukushima, we know what happened in 3 Mile Island, etc., right? So the risk, to me, is just too high for communities, no? And to me, it was very personal because it was going to be in Bataan, where I have most of my relatives, right? And God forbid, but had we operated that and we had an accident, the disaster it would have created. I think there are enough choices not to have to force ourselves. I agree with Joseph. It's very cheap and it's very clean, but you have to know how to run it, and you better have the right place to do it. And I doubt if we have those two capacities.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, because that means that he will support our proposal to pursue LNG, because that's really the only alternative to nuclear. But actually, my point, Mr. Chairman and Karl, is nuclear is cheap, nuclear is clean. However, it may not be the most accessible solution for the Philippines.
For the Philippines.
For the Philippines. For number one, the lack of technical skills, native technical skills. And secondly, the lack of the regulations, the regulatory framework that would govern the operation of a nuclear power plant. And the third would be the lack of time. Don't believe when people say, the DOE has in their list, SMR, small modular reactors by 2032. I believe that is impossible. Because the amount of studies that you need to undertake to get to a point where you can then say that it's safe to build a nuclear
To
power
be
plant.
confident that it is safe, right?
10 years.
Right.
And it'll take you another 4 to 5 years to build it.
Whatever happened to the Bataan nuclear power plant now?
It's now rusting. It should be called the Museum of Corruption. It's probably the most corrupt project in the Philippines.
It
I
was
say that
suspended.
It was suspended in after the 1986 People Power Revolution because of the corruption, and that was proven in court. Westinghouse had to compromise with us because they paid off large bribes to get the project off the ground.
Yeah, that's actually that case was decided in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Is there something we can do with that?
As I said, make it a
anymore?
museum and show how how corruption it destroys value. We paid $1 billion for that project and got nothing for it. I was the Secretary of Finance when we paid the last bill from, I think, the U.S. Exim Bank to pay for that financing.
Yeah.
Okay, it cost $1 billion. In Korea, they built exactly the same with the same technology for less than half.
Oh my God.
600 million, a million per megawatt. But you see, I forgot to mention earlier, the other issue with the Bataan nuclear power plant is that it sits very near an earthquake fault.
My point about location.
So it's good that it wasn't built.
Which community would want a nuclear plant within their proximity?
Yeah.
If we can ask the both of you, if you could delete one specific policy or regulation to instantly lower electricity prices or speed up the transition, what would it be, if there's anything?
Well, I think what Joseph had talked about earlier, no? It's to speed up regulatory approvals, permits, etc., and including, by the way, local governments, no? Because when you talk about right of way and so on, land use, that also involves a lot of local government permits. No? It's to speed up our ability of capital, private capital, to deploy its capital and get the projects off the ground, because it's a capacity that will create the competition that will bring down the cost of power. That was really the philosophy of why we created the PIRA. It's to create competition. It's to bring as much capacity into the system and let competition drive the price down.
How about you, sir?
Well, for one, I believe that we need to address the transmission logjam.
Yeah.
Right.
And the way to do that is to compel or mandate that NGCP take some entrepreneurial risk on its expansion. Also modify maybe the regulatory framework covering transmission by shortening the regulatory reset so that you shorten the lag
Yan yung 5
in the
years,
investment.
sir, no?
Yes.
Yeah. Or perhaps tweak the IPIRA to the extent that if NGCP cannot provide,
And
then
let somebody
they lose the right, and the right can be auctioned off to
Buys
someone
to
else.
somebody else. Yeah, that's a
Like
good idea.
when they're talking about Palawan, right?
Yeah.
If NGCP can provide it, they bid it out. EPI wants to bid for it because we want to generate power and to send it to Puerto Princesa. Give us the right.
Correct.
They may have lost their right because they have not done it.
With the upcoming presidential elections, are there any specific energy reforms that you're hoping to see at the forefront of the candidates' platforms?
I don't know, Joseph. For me, no.
Yeah.
No, why? Because I think the framework that we have for power, even the oil deregulation, it's all in place, right? So we just want to make sure that the implementation, the execution is as smooth, as frictionless as possible.
Yeah. From our side as power developers, the streamlining of the ERC approval process is one.
Yeah.
There's now a bit of duplication because they introduced the CSP competitive selection process. It's a very good requirement, but if you have that already, you bid out the contract, right? And then you have ERC approving it again to ensure competitiveness. So it should be one or the other.
Hindi
If
ba
it's
nakatulong yung one-stop shop, sir?
No. If this is competitive, if your PSA is competitively bid, then it should not be subjected to ERC
Again.
approval anymore.
Yeah.
It's one or the other.
Yeah. So red tape,
Yeah.
Reduce
Yes.
red tape. It's all the usual things, but we can do administratively. We don't need legislation for that. See, these are not policy decisions. These are administrative decisions.
Right.
And the good thing is that the new chair of the ERC recognizes that. He's actually open to that kind of change, where if it's competitively bid, no need for ERC review.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people are really reeling from the high power costs, no?
But let's not forget that we're in a very unusual situation. We're like in a COVID type environment. No? The Iran crisis has created a very elevated cost of power. But this is true for everybody around the world.
Right.
Yeah. This is nothing personal to the Philippines.
Yes.
So
But
let's not forget that. No? Put that into context,
Yes.
because you don't want to come up with solutions that's solving hopefully a 2-year problem, no? Not a forever problem.
well, given the current landscape, sir, no? What do you want to say to the Filipino consumers moving forward when it comes to the power sector? Because I know there's a lot of negativity going around when it comes to the high power costs.
Yeah.
Is there anything they can look forward to?
Well, as I mentioned a few things that you can look forward to. I think the universal charge should disappear from their power bills, hopefully by next year. Let's hope that, the political and the economic environment in the country will become more positive than what it is today. And I haven't seen it as bad as now in the last 20 years, right? So we're in a situation where the economy is growing very slowly. I mean, I think they reported 2.8 growth in GDP against a target of 3.5, and historically about 6%. No?
Right.
So the economy is growing very slowly. Inflation is very high. So, unfortunately, sadly, no. I mean, this is a time for tightening up the belt. I mean, you need to save, and in power, that's so important, because conservation is probably the best way to. But first, you have to conserve power.
Use energy wisely.
Less power, diba? Use less cars in the streets, and so on and so forth. But we need to use less of it. Right? We need to be more efficient, and then let's not do anything that prevents further development of capacity that would be for our own good.
How about you, sir?
I would echo the chairman's comment earlier about using energy wisely. But in addition to that, we need to inform ourselves as to what are the things that are available already that gives the consumer the power of choice. So this aggregation idea is going to be very helpful, because, again, going back to your village, if you were to aggregate, it's possible to save. Let's say Meralco is probably generating power at around 6-7 pesos per kilowatt hour. If you buy from an RES, you can buy at 5.
Yeah.
That's 2 pesos per kilowatt hour of reduction in your cost.
And you can do that in subdivisions,
Yes.
right? In townships.
Correct.
And of course, even certain businesses of a certain size.
Yes.
As you said, I mean, it's knowing what is available to you.
Yeah.
Because one of the other things that PIRA was so effective in is providing this open access, the power of choice, which was not there before.
And we have the the chairman to thank for that. Because really, if you talk about IPIRA failing to empower the consumer, I think it's wrong. The powers that the IPIRA accorded to the consumers are there. You just have to use it.
So it's also the responsibility of the consumer to know their options.
To know their rights and to know their options.
Well,
yes.
and to some extent, the government too. You have to educate. Let them know how you can save.
Well, before we formally end this episode, we actually ask NAC employees. Excuse me. So we have a fishbowl right here.
Okay.
We
it's a raffle ticket.
Yes, ask some of the NAC employees if they have any questions related to power. So let me read the questions, and then if any of you want to answer. Anonymous to sirs. Okay, so if you were to design a backup plan for the Philippines in the event of an energy crisis, what would be the first thing that you would do?
A backup plan. Gosh, if I had an answer for that, I'd be the most famous person in the world, because every country is reeling from the problems that we're facing because of a problem that we didn't create. I mean, it's affecting the whole world. This Iran crisis is affecting the whole world. And sadly, even if the wars were to stop today, the effects of it will run for a couple of years at least, as they try to rebuild all the capacities that have been destroyed.
Yeah.
So How do you plan for that? How do you create a contingency plan for that? Very little. And unfortunately, this is also a time when our government is not in the strongest fiscal position, where maybe temporarily we can subsidize, right? Make it easier. We're not.
Yeah.
We're not in a position. In fact, our position now is so much worse than it was a few years ago. I mean, if you look at our debt to GDP, you look at the fiscal deficit that we're suffering from, it's a lot more than than ideal situation, right? So we have very little flexibility for the government to subsidize. But if it calls for that, let's do it wisely. And I think that some of the things that the government is doing, targeted subsidy, public transportation, the deliveries so that commodity prices can be more stable. So we just have to be smarter in how to use that little money that we have.
I think to add to that, the solution to that problem, actually, part of that rests with us citizens and consumers. We are consuming roughly around 19,000 megawatts. That's our peak demand of electricity, 19,000 megawatts. If you save 10% of that, that's 1,900 megawatts of less million barrels of oil energy equivalent that we will be saving. You can count that in dollars or in pesos. That's how much you will save. That's a lot of money, right? And that's without us having to beg for oil supply from Russia or anywhere else. Just by simply consuming 10% less, right?
What do you think is the biggest hurdle in the Philippines' renewable energy transition? Are there
hurdle? Well, that should be Joseph's job because as EPI, we're precisely trying to address the gap in renewables, because that's our business.
Right.
Yes.
So it's for us to think of the solutions that will allow us to develop our business and grow our business, develop our capacities as fast as possible. And we need to be creative. Things like what Joseph described. For example, working with NGCP and maybe volunteering to do what they're supposed to do, but since they're constrained, we will do it for them. It will allow us to generate the capacity that we want to build. I think there are other things. Again, I go back to what's the most critical ingredient in being able to develop, let's say, solar. It's land. Okay, how do we make it easier? If there are government lands that are available, what can the government do to make them available to private developers like us? Right? How do they make permits to be able to use the land, to convert the land, from agriculture to whatever that we will need? How do they make that faster for us?
Would you say, sir, it's really the permitting process that could be the biggest hurdle?
No, there's a combination of hurdles. It differs from project to project. What it calls for is more creativity and diligence, because there are always going to be problems in projects. So it's for me, it's controlling the controllables and avoiding encountering uncontrollables. And if you end up with uncontrollables, manage them well. That's really all that you can do in our current context.
Right. Okay, we already answered this. What would you say to those who are anxious about the current energy situation?
Obviously, people are very anxious.
Okay, with the acceleration of EVs and solar technology driven by the global crisis, what's our plan for energy transition and integration of our businesses across the NAT group? Maybe.
Well, if I can attempt to answer that, one of the initiatives is to study introducing electrification in our operations. We're consuming a lot of power and diesel, especially in the mines. So one of the initiatives is to see how we can reduce that dependence on oil and see how we can get into electrification. Just a quick anecdote: my EV, I spend 1.5 pesos per kilowatt hour. Per kilometer.
Per kilometer.
If the equivalent car will cost you 4 times more.
Right. And I think we have to walk our talk, right?
Yes.
And I installed solar panels in my home some 15 years ago when it was double the price.
It's still working?
Still working. And when I had to decide whether to replace the batteries. No, I decided to just double the capacity of my solar panel. So I think it's also looking at how we can widen the application of renewables. No? One thing that hasn't happened yet in the Philippines is the adoption of solar in private residences.
Right.
Yeah? I don't think we've been very effective in being able to do that. Now, a big part of that is actually project management, because it's an installation that's a constraint. I think maybe it's something we can consider. Look at solar for small grid for private residences.
But I think Meralco has a program like that.
They have a company that's doing that. There are a few other companies. I use one, but we have not found the right solution to allow it to really explode and be widely
Make
adopted.
It more accessible. Yes. Ano ang allocation ng power generation sa communities? Pwede ba siya gamitin for social development programs, hindi lang for electrification? I think this is in the context of our mines with their social development programs.
I think let me try to answer that for the chairman. One of the things that the IPIRA has is the requirement imposed on power generators to set aside previously 1 centavo per kilowatt hour. Now it's 3 centavos per kilowatt hour that we generate. So if you have 100 megawatts and you run base load, right, 3 centavos per kilowatt hour is around 22 million pesos. And half of that is to be spent on electrification, supposedly, a quarter for environment, and then the other quarter for social. So
there is an allocation.
That's the mandatory contribution now.
So it's very specific.
Yeah, on the part of the power developer, you could voluntarily contribute to social development by engaging in meaningful CSR activities.
And by the way, by definition, social development cannot happen without power. It's a necessary
development in general.
So you can't have, without electrification, social development would be very difficult to do.
That's why power issue is also a social issue.
Absolutely.
In your perspective, are we entering the worst energy crisis in history?
The worst? I don't know. Have I lived long enough to know everything that has happened in history? Well, it's certainly one of the worst. One of the worst. No? But there have been other periods in my lifetime where we've seen it. The earlier wars in the Middle East where gasoline prices went crazy.
The oil embargo in the 70s.
Bakit tayo ang nagbabayad ng kuryente ng 4Ps?
Ng?
4Ps, like beneficiaries of the 4Ps
marginalized
program.
Consumers.
Oh. Well, that's part of society. As a former government official, it's part of our responsibility. In fact, I hope that question does not mean that the person is not sympathetic to the lower sectors in our society. No? I think for people who are able to, we should be able to find a way. And government is a transmission of, that's like taxation. That's why you have progressive taxation, right? You tax the rich more so that you can provide for the poor. And it's just the same thing with power.
That's actually a good way to put it. Last question. Do you believe that electricity is not the main problem facing our country?
Oh, by far. But let's not get into that.
What do you think is the main problem facing our country?
There are too many problems. But I think it's very obvious it's in the public space. I mean, the level of corruption has exploded in the Philippines to unimaginable scale. And I think it's destroying the Filipino spirit, no?
True.
You cannot be optimistic when you're surrounded by this kind of environment about our future as a country, as Filipinos. And I think we need to find a way to break from this parang forever chain of corruption. This is not, we're talking about energy, but I would just add, I think we need to find a way to change our political system so that it can be more supportive of future growth. And by that, what I mean is, this idea of an anti-political dynasty. If the president would like to be able to leave a legacy that will forever put him in the right place, It's to push through Congress and the Senate a proper, effective, anti-political dynasty law that would really effectively limit, if not totally eliminate, political dynasties. The sad thing is politics in the country has become a business enterprise.
Right.
And that's why you have political dynasties. It's something that you pass on to the next generation, to your in-laws, to your brother, to your sister. And when you create a dependency of families on politics to survive, that's what you create. You create an environment that's ripe for corruption, and that's what we're experiencing today.
How about you, sir?
I think the chairman covered it adequately. But this chain of corruption. You'd be surprised. The SK chairperson of DASMA
The youth.
and Magallanes are being charged with corruption.
Ganong level.
Isn't that very sad?
At the lowest level of
And
politics.
and youth, young people, which was supposed to be the future of our country.
And in two of the most prosperous villages in the country. Dasmariñas village and Magallanes village.
It's really, corruption really saps the energy of the country, the people. And without that energy, that positive feeling, it's hard to grow and develop our country and have a better Philippines.
Choose wisely in 2028.
Well, just to close the episode, no? And we're already talking about politics. Do you have a message for the Filipino youth with the upcoming election? Well, you said that, of course, we need to vote wisely.
Yeah, choose wisely. Choose a leader that you can trust, a leader of integrity, and a leader of substance.
And competence.
And competence, for sure.
Yeah. But I would also say don't lose hope, keep your faith. I think, we're a country that has gone through many trials in our history. We've gone through wars, we've gone through revolutions, we've gone through many, many different crises. I think we have always been able to dig into ourselves and have the resilience. But we shouldn't do that blindly. We should demand from our leaders that they have to change so that we have a shot. And the young people, the youth of our country, they're our hope. And I hope they don't lose the faith and start going overseas and just saying and giving up. It's the only country we have.
Right. Well, thank you, sirs, for such an insightful episode. And we'll see you again for the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karl.
Thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
Joseph.
And that's it for another episode of Breaking Ground. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe for more meaningful conversations. We'll see you on the next one.